This is a story about how the body fights back against the billions of microbes that try to invade us every day. Epithelium is our first line of defense, and this involves skin and inner linings of the body. They're going to block most pathogens from entering the body. Pathogen, see that word pathos means to suffer, and the gen, think of Genesis in the Bible, so it's the beginning of suffering or the causers of disease. Interesting, bacteria can protect us. We have normal inhabitants of our skin and membranes. They're there to compete with their pathogenic relatives, other microbes that are not so good. Example is Lactobacillus vaginalis. It's a bacteria it's going to produce lactate in the vagina, and it's in this vaginal mucosa that the environment becomes acidic, and it prevents other bacteria from invading this body part. I mentioned the low pH, acidic conditions in the vagina that few pathogenic bacteria can withstand. The problem here is sometimes antibiotics will kill beneficial lactobacillus cultures, and now the woman suffers candida or yeast infections. Of course, men can suffer this as well. Cilia mucous membranes, these are also part of skin and membranes. Cilia are protein fibers or filaments that line the mucosa, especially part of the respiratory tract. And what they're going to do is sweep foreign debris upwards and out of the body. So all those dusty roads and all that diesel smoke that you've inhaled over the years, most of it you end up swallowing, which is a good thing. The cilia doesn't work by itself. It has a sticky coating of mucus, and that's going to trap many organisms. The mucus also contains powerful enzymes such as lysozyme. That's just one type, and so it gives them a chemical charge, destroys these pathogens. This is one of the problems with smoking, because tobacco alters the shape of cilia, and so they become twisted. They no longer beat in unison, and eventually the mucosa becomes toughened. It almost becomes skin-like and no longer traps debris. So a chronic smoker, when they inhale, there's nothing to protect them. So how do they remove debris? They have to typical smoker's cough. Epidermis, we're still on the same defense here. It's a type of epithelium. It has squamous cells that have deposits of keratin. Now, keratin will surround these cells and cause them to be waterproof. And so over time, these squamous cells are going to die. They're going to pile up, and we get something called stratified or layered. So we have layer after layer of dead, dry, scaly epithelial cells. It's like a desert, and not much can survive on the surface of our skin because of this. Dermis is sometimes called the living layer. It's under the epidermis, and it's protected as well because we have things like sebaceous glands that secrete sebum. It's a waxy lipid that helps to keep the skin supple and stretchy, and importantly, it keeps our skin from cracking because it's those breaks in the epithelium. That is where a little fungus or a bacterium is going to dive in and cause some problems. So sebum keeps our skin elastic, thank goodness. It also causes some acne, so there's a price we pay. There are defensive chemicals, such as the lysozyme enzymes in our tears and saliva, and they're going to chemically destroy pathogens. So tears are not just about broken hearts, they're also about protecting us. Urine has a very low pH, so it's going to retard bacterial and fungal growth in most situations. Urine's fairly sterile as well. I remember having to wash my hands in urine in parts of Africa where the water was so contaminated. I don't recommend doing this here in California. Mucus in the goblet cells, they have a very important role. If you ingest something that's pathogenic and it's traveling through your small intestines, well, something amazing happens. Diarrhea. Most people don't consider diarrhea amazing, But truly it is. We have to appreciate it because our body is flushing out whatever irritating or pathogenic substance is in there. So when we have a bout of diarrhea, we got to just let it flow. Let our body do its thing. In our stomach there is hydrochloric acid, HCl, in the gastric fluids, and it destroys most pathogens. We rarely get upset stomach unless maybe we had a huge meal and we've diluted the gastric fluids to a point that they can't do their job. Second line of defense. Now whatever it was has penetrated our surface epithelium, which doesn't happen that often. But when it does happen, we're ready because we have innate immunity. It's the first to respond to internal invasions. It has no memory, and it's non-specific. So what I'm saying here is it attacks everything. It attacks bacteria, viruses, it even attacks splinters. You get my point? Everything is game. It relies mostly on the lymphatic macrophages. I'll talk about these and the complement proteins. Hey, look at that picture. There's a huge macrophage engulfing a parasitic worm. Wow. In the second line of defense, we have a network of canals in our body you don't hear much about. It's the lymphatic system. It collects fluids that have leaked out of capillary beds. If you look at the diagram, the red part is an arteriole. It branches into capillaries. And from there, the lymphatic system takes over. It's going to return some of that fluid back to the bloodstream after it filters the fluid through lymph nodes. These lymph nodes, along with the spleen, have chambers where white blood cells gather after they've been produced in bone marrow. So they collect in those ducts, in those little chambers, waiting for some sort of pathogen. The macrophage, it means big eater, macro meaning big, phage means eater. It's a type of white blood cell. It's going to consume all foreign invaders, and the word for that is antigen. And this is a good word to learn so that it comes right to your understanding immediately. Antigen is foreign. So antigen could be a bacteria, virus, protist. Anything that doesn't belong is an antigen. So when a macrophage encounters an antigen, it's going to release cytokines. And these are chemicals that attract other defense cells. It's an alert system, right? Macrophage encounters an antigen, and rather than just killing it on the spot and cruising off, it kills it, and it also sends out a chemical messenger. Hey, watch out, we're under attack. We also have complement proteins that are circulating in our blood and also our lymph tissue. And these are little puzzle pieces that join together to form attack complexes. And the attack complexes work in different ways. Some of them will attach to the antigen and puncture it and kill it. Just that simple. There are also complement proteins that don't puncture, but they attach to the antigen, and then it's easier to destroy because many bacteria have a slippery capsule, and it's difficult for our body to destroy it. Think of the one that causes strep throat is encapsulated, and so our body figures a way around this by putting these studs or little pieces of complement protein on there. Now the macrophage can come in, get a grip, and destroy it. Mast cells are another type of white blood cell that responds to activated complement proteins. So when our levels of complement proteins increase in the bloodstream, the mast cells go, whoa, that's a sure sign we're under attack. And when we're under attack, these mast cells are going to release something called histamine. And histamine is a chemical, maybe you've heard of antihistamines, that make us sleepy. Histamine is going to cause the arterioles to dilate, so they're going to expand with fluid, and the capillaries are going to become leaky. And if you look at this diagram, there's a kind of a neat diagram of a capillary. You see it's not just like a solid tube, but it has openings, and that's where the plasma is going to leak out. We have edema or swelling, and that is why we can't breathe very well when we have a cold, because the plasma is leaking into the tissues, and that is precisely what we want. We want to be blocked up. We want that edema flowing into our nasal tissues, because that's where the battles takes place. The minute we reach for a cold medicine and shut down that response, hey, we feel great, we can breathe again, but believe me, the virus loves it more, because now the virus can spread and is not being attacked. Fever is often a response when macrophages release cytokines. In fever, we're not sure the role of fever, but it may be that creates conditions that are just too hot for most pathogens to function. Okay? Most pathogens have a narrow optimum range at which they exist, and if we can push them out of that range, then they have problems. And that's why we don't always treat fevers when they're just maybe 100, 101, 102. Although if it's a pediatric patient, boy, we watch them carefully, because their core body temperature can change rapidly. Dendron kind of means tree and branches. So, and if you look at these guys, they look like they have many branched arms that trap antigens. Okay, what's an antigen? Anything that's an invader. The dendritic cells are often also called sort of the on switch of the third line of defense. The third line is when our skin and epithelium, our first line, fails, our innate fails, and now we're in trouble. This thing is getting deeper into our tissues, and now we have to turn on the switch for the adaptive immune system. In review, we have the first line of defense, which is skin and linings. We have beneficial bacteria such as lactobacillus that produces lactate, creates an acidic environment, low pH, unless we're on antibiotics. We have protein filaments called cilia. They work together with mucus to trap and sweep debris out of our body. Chemicals such as lysozyme work also. If we smoke, then that changes the shape of cilia, and this system doesn't work. The skin has squamous stratified cells that are surrounded in keratin, become a dry, scaly desert where nothing can live. The dermis is the lower living layer. It produces a sebum, a waxy lipid from sebaceous glands. Keeps our skin supple so it doesn't crack. There are defensive chemicals such as lysozymes in our tears. Urine has a low pH, and our small intestines contain goblet cells that expel mucus and flush out anything unwanted. Gastric fluids in the stomach also very acidic, HCl there, destroying organisms. Now if that antigen makes it through our first line, our second line is waiting, and that's the innate immunity. It's the first responder to internal invasions. It's a general, non-specific, it attacks everything, and it has no memory. The lymphatic system is one of its channels, and it moves from capillary beds into nodes in the spleen and in lymph nodes. There are macrophages in chambers that are waiting for an invader to step in. Antigens are foreign objects, anything, splinter, bacteria, virus. Cytokines is one of the chemicals produced by macrophages to bring more macrophages into the area, alerts the body we're under attack. There are complement proteins that do two different things. Some will form a complex, an attack complex. It's like a tube that punctures and kills antigens. But some complement proteins just form studs on the surface of bacteria, such as ones with capsules that are smooth. That way our macrophages can destroy them. Mast cells are going to release histamine when they perceive that we're under attack. And histamines are going to cause the capillaries to become leaky. Arterioles are going to increase in diameter, and we get swelling, fever, cytokines. Maybe fever creates an environment too hot for invaders. We're not sure about that. And the last member here is the dendritic cells. They look like trees somewhat. They have many branches for trapping antigens. And they are the on switch for the final line of defense, the adaptive.